Good evening. Allow us a few more minutes to ensure that a few more participants join in. So we'll probably go online in 5 minutes from now. Thank you. Good evening. On behalf of Upanakar Shikshan Mandal's Kamla Raheja Vidyarthi Institute for Architecture and Environmental Studies, we welcome you to the concluding session of Day 2 of the Kamla Raheja Memorial Lecture Series 2021, supported by the Kamla Raheja Foundation. We shall be continuing with the KRVA Design Dissertation Colloquium, comprising of a lecture by our invited panelist, Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee, and a series of presentations of the cited students' work. May I now invite my colleague Mamta Patwardhan to formally introduce our panelists and to anchor the subsequent discussion session. Over to you, Mamta.
Thank you, Sandeep. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. I'd like to now invite Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee. She's an Indian-born Australian feminist academic practitioner in architecture and design based in Australia and India. She is professor and dean at Faculty of Design, Manipal University in Jaipur, and erstwhile dean academics at Avni Institute of Design. Dr. Chatterjee is the author of 3 books, Surface and Deep Histories, Critiques and Practices in Art, Architecture and Design, Built, Unbuilt and Imagined Sydney, John Ruskin and the Fabric of Architecture, and is contracted as the area editor for Southeast Asia for the Bloomsbury Global Encyclopedia of Women in Architecture, 1960-2015. Dr. Chatterjee is regional editor, Asia Pacific, Textile, Cloth and Culture, companion to the Guild of St. George, member of editorial board for architecture, Cambridge Scholars Publishing, and senior research fellow, Center for Architecture Theory, Criticism, History at the University of Queensland. She has 19 years of experience as an academic and has taught at top institutions in Australia, China, and India. Dr. Chatterjee's research interests are in architectural theories and history, feminist discourses, textile tectonic theories of architecture, potentialities of theories, generative processes in design, design research, gender and academic leadership, and student learning cultures. She is an international associate member, American Institute of Architects, affiliate level 1 member, Australian Institute of Architects, and affiliate member, Royal Institute of British Architects. With that list of exhaustive accomplishments, I now invite Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee to present her talk. Welcome, Anuradha.
Thank you, Mamta. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, KRBIA, for welcoming me into your conversations that are really interesting. I'll share my presentation. Let me know if you can't see it. All right, so I identify as an academic practitioner because I have spent most of my life looking at my teaching projects as a form of scholarship and as kind of research. And so what I'm presenting to you today would be an account of 3 studio projects that I have run in 3 different locations globally. And I'll talk through a little bit about the pedagogies of studio education through 3 of these processes, 3 of these projects. The reason I call it other ways of proceeding is that my focus is always on studio process and studio method. And what I mean by that will become clear to you by the end of the presentation. So, all right, let's get started. So my first proposition is about the ideas of deep and shallow spatialities, or is this idea, is surface deep or shallow? So I'm very interested, as Mamta has explained, in this idea of surface, architectural surface, and that interest really started with my PhD thesis on John Ruskin. So the studio which I ran at the University of New South Wales in Sydney back in 2011 was titled Rethinking and Remaking the Threshold. So the studio explored a premise in architecture, which is surface, which, as we all kind of assume, that surface is thin, both philosophically as well as formally. But that is something that I kind of tried to expand upon and kind of debunk through my research. So through my research in John Ruskin's Surface and Textile Theory of Architecture, I also became exposed to the context of contemporary architectural practice globally that saw a return to surface, not just because of advances in digital design, but also because there were a lot more intersections that were happening between critical practices in fashion, textile, and product design with architecture. So using this as a prompt, I looked at a brief theoretical history of surface in architecture. And I argued that it was useful to do that because there was at least 5 different ways in which we could conceptualize and historicize surface in architecture. The first was surface as a representational element, which is what we commonly understand it as, which is when architectural surface carries coded messages about the organization of the program, the ethical values of the client or the architect, and the connection to context. And these messages are often symbolic or literal. So that's the first most obvious manifestation of surface. The second manifestation that I looked at was urban surfaces. This category evaluated the thresholds in a building. So especially when the surface of the building contributed to transforming the physical, spatial, and psychological characteristics of the public space. So looked at canopies, entrances, balconies, fenestrations, everything that happened on the surface of the building, but in fact contributed to the shaping of the public space. Then I also looked at surface as an integrated concept, is when surface, in fact, is not just a functional or decorative role, but it also has a performative role. These are instances when surface also is structure and surface also is space, and it has a kind of a sustainable aspect to it. I also looked at the fourth aspect, which is the idea of transient surfaces. This was interesting because we always think that facade is facade of the surface of a building is a depthless, static entity, but often surfaces can also be physically and visually transient. And the fifth one was surface as a design tool. We looked at where surface can be used as a design and composition method. So using these five frameworks, the five taxonomies of surface in the theoretical history, I looked at kind of at a project, at a studio project, which was staged at a fourth year, so sort of master's first year level in Australia, where we looked at surface as a kind of a prompt and think of, well, what happens if you use that as a prompt for the design studio and you don't? So we started to think about what happens if you design outside in. So the project involved students looking, having their own position statement, and the position statement was in fact captured as a conceptual freestanding architectonic wall. It was scaleless, but nonetheless, it had kind of architectonic elements of a wall in the sense that it was vertical and horizontal. It had thickness. It was able to self-support. It had repeatable units. It had porosity. It had density. It had all of those different qualities. And we said, well, how do students capture their position in terms of the surface or through those five taxonomies as an architectonic artifact? So we got quite a few. It was a studio of about 12 students, and we got many different iterations. So this was also a very interesting, example where the student kind of layers up, sheets of papers that are kind of punched, that have holes punched through them, and just slightly shifts them to create a kind of a porosity which is not always evident to the eye, but that one has to explore and discover. Then these were also, again, examples of students who looked at this idea of repeatable units that were able to layer up and find a kind of a thickness and a self-supporting substance to be able to stand on their own. So what the intention was to, this was the architecture building. So at UNSW, which is my alma mater, and I was also working there. This is the architecture building. This is called the Red Center, and literally this is a threshold we were looking at. We started to ask what happens if we design from outside in, because often when we are engaged in an architecture studio, we always proceed from within to without, from plan to surface, plan to elevation, and so we said, what happens if you reverse it? And also, not just reverse it for the heck of it, but also we thought that what happens if you unpack something that is flat? Because nothing is truly flat, whether you see a photograph or you see a painted surface or you see the media screen, nothing is really flat. In fact, every kind of flatness is in fact composed of a series of depths. So the project was speculative in the sense we started to think, well, what happens if we design from without? Also, what happens when you take an organizational structure, a different structure, and impose it or impress it upon an existing building, an existing organizational structure? What happens? How does it change that building? This was one example where which we looked at when one student came up with this conceptual wall. Which was then developed into something. So it was kind of a translation, but not quite a scientific, but more of a speculative translation. What happens? How would you do that? So in terms of, they kind of looked at literally that double height space, actually the triple height space that you're looking sort of, that's just between those beams, and started to think of what happens when you insert another gallery into a gallery. So, and then they started to explore sort of, light qualities, spaces to occupy. How do you occupy this surface? And what happens when you insert this? How does it change the spaces within? So this was one of the other winning schemes. So students actually voted to decide who actually wins this competition. And it was then this particular wall that was developed into the threshold or the refurbishment of the threshold of the building. And these are just some views of the same wall, which again it didn't have really it didn't really have a bottom and a top side, like it didn't have a front and a back. So it was kind of non-orientable surface. It was kind of the same on both sides as well as the top and bottom. So which was really interesting in terms of how they would translate that. So initially they started by looking at quite a literal imposition. And then this was the final outcome. Again, all of these are very speculative projects that we looked at. And so they started to look at, well, what happens, what really was the issue with this building is that it was kind of a singular programming along the threshold. It was just offices that were there. So it was a kind of a surface that wasn't really engaging with the public space. As you can see from this photograph here, this building, in fact, needs to have a conversation with the public space. So it's an important processional path and the building is an important urban sort of a micro-urban artifact that needs to have, in fact, a conversation with the space around and people around it. So main intention behind this project by the students was to fragment and dematerialize the surface and create and think of other organizational strategies that might come up. So by doing that, they in fact inserted studios and meeting spaces within the depth of this particular space, and started to think about display spaces and meeting spaces, more of a hybrid programming than a kind of a singular programming. One of the other underlying aspects of this particular project was also that we wanted to think of what kind of, so when you design a plan, it's either a free plan or it's more of a structured plan. What happens, what kind of a plan or what kind of sections emerge when you don't think with the plan? So the plan was probably the last or the second last things that the students made in order to resolve this particular project. So we definitely were very conscious of that we talked about something called the orthographic gaze, the controlling gaze of the designer. And we really wanted to kind of challenge that and said, well, what if we don't design with a plan? What kind of a plan do you get if you don't design with the plan from the start? So there's again students talking about animation through form and the change of the depth of the facade, creating different angles of view. So very animated, it's a very animated threshold, but not just, so it's not still just a surface, but also that the surface actually changes the inside of the building as well. The main manifesto that was driving this particular project and similar other projects that I've done in other universities is that it problematizes the widely held assumption that spatiality is the essence of architecture, in fact, is disciplinary limit. That in fact surface is flat, but surface is not flat. This is something that we challenged. Surface as architecture's, as it's disciplinary unconscious, it actually weakens the ontological certainty of the discipline founded exclusively on narrow definitions of space and occupation. One of the main things also was unpacking the spatiality of surface, this idea that we said that the pictorial surface or the media surface or the painted surface is in fact not flat, but in fact consists of depths, as does a piece of fabric that too is not flat, is in fact a series of depths that are compressed. So, and then the final thing, as I just said, was to shift the creative force from the orthographic gaze of the designer to the deep surface of the embedded spatiality. So that was the first thing that I wanted to talk to you all about today. The second proposition that I wanted to talk about today was looking out and into nature. And this particular project was, I led this at a School of Architecture at Xi'anjiaotong Liverpool University, which was a partner university between a Chinese university and Liverpool University in the UK, when I was working there in Suzhou in 2015. And this is the lake where the site was in Suzhou, which is called the Yangcheng Lake. And the site is actually marked. The broader context is in the image on the left, and the site, the more immediate context is, as you can see on the right, marked on the right. And that little, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen or not, but that little thing was a site. That little trapezoid was a site for our project. So the lake, it's not just a lake, but also the wetlands. So the Yangcheng Lake Peninsula, as I said, is located in the northeast of the Suzhou Industrial Park, and it has about 30 kilometers of shoreline, and it has the features of typical water country in South Jiangsu province. The peninsula is home to more than about 80 kinds of birds, 40 planktons, and 30 benthos. It's got about 200 kinds of wild plants, 200 kinds of cultivated plants, and 30 aquatic plants. In 2012, the Jiangsu provincial government issued an official approval of upgrading this peninsula to a provincial tourist resort. So there's this particular precinct was under development, but at the same time, we were really mindful that it had to be kind of ecologically, sensitive and development. So this particular project, we had parallel briefs, and students had to design a small scale or medium scale building. My particular studio was focused on designing a wetlands research and interpretation center. So it's a very small institutional building with some community functions like research and teaching spaces, laboratories, workshops, lecture theatres, that sort of stuff. And also information aspects like galleries, archives, resource rooms, and library, and spaces for communal use like restaurant, conference rooms, and short-term accommodation in case the research center was hosting a convention or conference. So it was a very simple brief. But the theoretical position of this brief was informed by really primarily by an awareness and experience of ecology and landscape, and not landscape in a kind of an aestheticized, let's look at the landscape approach to landscape. Students had to understand what it meant to design in a context of reclaimed land from the wetlands, and how much they should build and how they should build. Students also had to design a building that was instrumental in connecting research into wetlands, and also build an experience and education around it. So in a way, they had to design a building that was democratizing knowledge. That I think one of the projects we saw today, this afternoon, was also about this waste treatment center, which is again about kind of educating the public about what that means. So this building also had a similar kind of a brief, that it had to engage visitors and really talk to the brief about how that idea of wetlands is experienced in the building. So one of the main things that I was conscious about sensitizing the students to is that it is not enough to just build, but also they also remaster plan the site in consultation with environmental engineers and landscape architects to think of how they might restore wetlands. So it was also a restorative aspect to it. It wasn't just a matter that, yes, now we have land, we'll just build there. That's extremely selfish. And we really wanted to say, so the image on the left is site as found, and the image on the right on this slide is site as designed. So not only they designed the building, but they also redesigned the landscape in order to restore the wetlands. And again, as you can probably see with this white dotted line on the right-hand side is a site, and it's actually sitting against one of those sort of the wetlands, the new sort of water channels that have been introduced into the site. Also wanted students as a kind of an artifice, even though this is not what the designed landscape would look like. I still wanted them to think about how that might be experienced as obviously at a distance, but that I think was important because they didn't really have a site. So this was their design site or a montage of a design site. Of course, this is not what it would look like. It's an artifice. We recognize that. But nevertheless, it was kind of a thinking tool for the students to kind of think through. And a more important part of this studio was collaboration and working across scales. So working across a scale of 500, and this is a 500 scale model of the master plan, the design site. So as you can see, a lot of these models are all about testing how you have a conversation with the site, how do you have a conversation with water, with the wetlands, and how do you create a kind of a human connection with the landscape, which is not just a visual aesthetic, looking out into the view, kind of enjoying it in a kind of a disembodied manner, but in a kind of a more engaged manner. So these are just different students' models where they're exploring, these are working models of what their ideas might mean in the context of the broader site. So this is one of the, this is again, as you can see, it's a site plan at 1:1000, and the student here has got quite a finite, quite a constrained, and quite a tight sort of built form, which was done quite deliberately because this student in particular was playing with this idea of creating an inner world where you create a sensory experience of what it means to be around water, but at the same time provide views to the outside. The easiest thing to do, which would be quite a negative thing to do, would be just open it up and provide views across, because the best way to reduce experience of a building is to provide uninterrupted views of the outside. So he was really playing with this kind of contrast of interrupting views as well as enabling views. So therefore, he created this very tight, very kind of a constrained sort of an organization and circulation, as you can see. So as you can see, just very briefly looking at this plan, you have internal courtyards, but you also have these gallery spaces. When you're walking through, there are these decks, and then either you can walk out and go into the site beyond, or if you're up, floors above, you would be looking out. So there's always a point of looking in, experiencing the building from within, and understanding the sensory aspects of what it means to be around water and to be in the context of a wetland, but also providing views to the outside. So so then again, these are again views of how the building was having a conversation. So as you can see, it was placed quite close to the road. It was very important that you place the building, you have a smaller footprint. It is as close to the existing road as possible. And you provide some areas where people can step out and understand what they're visiting, what the context is. And again, like I said, that working across scales was quite important, and it wasn't that it always moved from 500 to 200 to 100 to 50, but a lot of times the scales were happening simultaneously, so that it is possible to work at 1:50 scale and then go back to 1:500 and say, well, that actually doesn't work, this organization, and needs to change. So this is again just a student kind of detailing out and thinking about those slits and those openings and those voids and those three-dimensional staggers that happen that allow this kind of views to operate through. This is another student, same project, again working with this idea of twisting a very controlled and a very small footprint building and twisting it around, and then thinking of, well, how do I access the building from the main road, and how do I access the landscape? And there's a bridge across, as those double lines over there, that's the bridge across there. She works with this idea of kind of rotating three-dimensionally the circulation. Of course, a student would be best, she would be in a better position to explain this project. But from what I remember, it was kind of a three-dimensional movement where you move from one block to the other, and then you kind of step down back into the block at an angle, and all the while looking at how you might again create views at certain points out. So again, looking in, looking out, and creating atmospheres that you would remember. So like I said, the brief was fundamentally around the fact that the building can foster education, curiosity, awareness through architectural legibility and circulation. They were also asked to think about wetlands as not just environmental assets, which they are, and which such kind of projects really sensitize students to, but they also evoke an emotional response to openness, mystery, and fear, because qualities of water, for instance, water is poetic, it's aesthetic, like it's murkiness, it's dampness, it nurtures, but it also threatens. It protects, but it also corrodes. It connects as well as separates. It's surface as well as depth, right? So it's not all good and it's not all bad. So I wanted really students to kind of really start to think of how the interiors of the building might talk to some of these more difficult, the more nuanced atmospheric qualities water and how they might sort of embody, have their building kind of embody that. And then the final thing was how and to what extent the building touches the ground and extends into the surroundings, and whether that articulation, whether it can be articulated to inform the experience and understanding of the wetlands. So these are the main few ideas that really drove this project. The third project and proposition was around this idea of weak methods. So we always as studio educators and academic practitioners, we always want to design processes and methods that are watertight and that are predictable. And this was a really interesting project because it was always about deferring, and it was always about being weak and not being strong. So this particular project was titled Narrative Sense in Space. This is a Cultural Interpretation Center in Mahe in Puducherry, which I led at Avni Institute of Design. And this was a semester 5 project, which expected students to understand the complexities in the cultural history of Mahe, consolidate oral histories, and construct a narrative that is meaningful and shared, and kind of talk about that through their spatial and tectonic design and material detailing of the interpretation center. However, we went about this project in a kind of a roundabout way because we wanted to. So this is just a historic map of Mahe. And so what we did was the first thing that you do is when you get a project is go to the site. We did not do that. We actually started with a novel on this particular city. It's a novel by M. Mukundan. It's called, in English, the English translation is called The Banks of the Aarey, which is the Aarey River in Puducherry. So the students collaboratively read this novel. So it was one student to a chapter, and they actually read the book together individually and then retold the stories. And so that was a very important entry point. We really wanted to position our inquiry and the studio project in this particular city because of its contextual complexities and contradictions, which we said will remain unresolved. Mahe is a small town in an ex-French colony on the Malabar coast of India. It's adjacent to Kerala and within the Union Territory of Puducherry. People of Mahe speak Malayalam, but they're not Malayalis in terms of identity. And many identify more with France than they do with Kerala or India. And as you know, and if you go through the history of Mahe, which I wouldn't go through, there was a series of events starting from 1721 all the way till 1850s, and then its final local rebellion in 1954 that it really gains its independence, but it was constantly handed back between France and England. So it's a long and complex history, and now it's kind of infamous as a place where people come to buy cheap alcohol. So it really is a city that is suffering from a lack of care, lack of care and a lack of attention to its cultural richness that it has had, that it continues to have. And so we took advantage of the fact that because it is located within the Talasheri heritage tourism circuit, we said that a project like this could stimulate and assist the process of rediscovery and reinscription of the local and regional culture. So this was one of the main reasons why we took this particular project. So what the students did then, after reading the novel, we asked them to convert each of the chapters into tiles, so 4 or 5 tiles, and we created a kind of a graphic novel installation where each tile had to capture an event and a space and an emotion. So there were about 165, there were about 35 chapters and about 165 to 170, I don't remember exact number. And that was, so they created like a graphic novel installation as a kind of a collaborative process. They also were asked to look at converting each of these tiles into a kind of an imagined architectonic with a space which embodies not as a neutral vector point, but as a material spatial architectonic of the tile that they had drawn out, that they had sketched out, and start to kind of think of whether that particular story, whether that particular episode, that event is in fact captured in that particular artifact. And it's such a hard thing that the students, one lesson that they learned, that it's such a hard thing to control that. The other parallel theme that was going is that from this set of 165 tiles, we asked them to also stitch together 6 to 8 tiles that told the embedded narrative within the larger narrative, because anytime you tell a story, you never retell the story in its entirety, or always there's so many stories embedded within the larger story. So we really wanted them to kind of think about maybe it would be an interesting thing to think about, how do you arrive at the building through by pulling out a thread. So imagine that the novel is a tapestry, a fabric, and you pull out a thread that belongs to that fabric, and this particular embedded narrative is that thread. And how do you design a building around that? So what students then started to do is saying, well, how do these different architectonic forms that they were dreaming of and imagining as containing certain moments, certain emotions, certain memories of the novel, how do they come together? And do they even come together? Can they come together? This process again was very deliberate. We were very conscious that we wanted students to work with fragments and move towards wholeness, because often what students do is they start with a whole and they start dividing that into parts. So we said, is it possible to achieve wholeness or at least a tentative wholeness by using a language of fragments? So this is just some initial examples of students, trying to put together an assemblage of fragments. This was a site. This is a view out on the left, is a view out from the site looking towards a river in Mahi, and it also had a historic building. The image on the right shows you that there's in fact a historic building, a French house that they had to incorporate into their project. So it wasn't just based on fiction. The students also went to site and talked to local historians and local communities, and really understood what the cultural significance of the city is. What is it? So legends and stories and myths, and and also picking up those buildings and spaces and sites that have been mentioned in the novel, in fact actually even exist in the city of Mahi today. So visiting them and just trying to get a sense of what the city is and what is worth talking about. Students then started to look at this idea of siting, so kind of a site planning, but using these architectonic assemblages to see, well, how do you achieve that, and how you might negotiate architectural programs into each of these spaces. And when you do that, how do these enclosures actually transform? So there had to be this kind of an elasticity to thinking. So these are just different iterations of students playing. So we were very, very sure, and it's a massive risk for students because they were very, very uncomfortable with this idea that, why were we not drawing a site plan, and what does this really mean, and how can you have such weird forms? And because there's a kind of an expectation by the time they reach semester 5, there's this pedagogies are kind of designed in a way to kind of build in these expectations, and students have probably greater expectations of what the expected outcome is than probably tutors, than teachers. So it was really a process of trying to challenge and dismantle that in their head, and trying to get them to be easy with the process of taking another route, taking another path through the design process. And then, there were, this was the first sort of manifestation in which, you really start to have these enclosures at scale on site. And these were some of the final forms that we start to see as emerge. So I think in this, I'm not sure how I'm going with time, but I think I've got about 3 or 4 minutes to go. So like I said, as an academic practitioner who's always been interested in design and especially studio as a kind of research and as scholarship, I've always been interested in these ideas, associated paradigms of inquiry, rigor, but also experimentation and uncertainty. I've also been interested, as I showed you in the first project, with that conceptual wall project, the critique of control in total design, this idea of total design, that a designer has complete control on whatever the design, this idea that designer is in control, but you seldom are, and because you can only kind of imagine, envisage only certain aspects even of what you're designing. So we started students to, well, how much control do you really have on what you design, and then what people feel in what you've designed. We were also interested in this idea of the generative fragments. So like you see, at least all three projects have an underlying interest in this idea of fragments that can help activate conceptualization processes. So you're not always starting with a whole, you're not starting with a flat slab, but that the fact that the plan actually emerges through a negotiation of the three-dimensional thinking and two-dimensional thinking. And this idea that design processes have to be rhizomatic. I think one of the students mentioned the rhizome in one of the presentations, this idea of non-linear design thinking. But then again, it wasn't like non-linear that you can just set out to be non-linear. It is not, you can't kind of script that either. Either something can absorb their non-linearity or it can't, but you can't script non-linearity. So like I said, police spaces interested in challenging that, interested in challenging this idea of control of spaces. Weak architecture, interested in this idea of weak architecture. Architecture is event that somehow it has the kind of a weakness. It is not such a strong, in-your-face representation of what this space is supposed to make you feel, because boy, where is the agency of the visitor? Is it so didactic? Is it building so didactic that it will tell people exactly where to go, what to feel, and how to feel, right? And then questioning that what happens when you let go as a designer. Does it only produce bad architecture? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. But these are questions that are important to ask in a studio. So I think this is probably the last few things that I wanted to talk about was the fact that I remain interested in these sorts of ideas, other thoughts, method over process. So I've always told my students as well as my colleagues is that every mechanical production has a process, but it's not creative process. So is it better to call it a method than a process? Then we talked about navigating and meandering is valuing that over arriving, because you will arrive, but, valuing that and privileging that over arriving. Discovering and gaining insight over learning. So gaining insight, when you're engaged in the process, what are the insights that you gain than just learning? And that's what makes design research, because if you just do design as design, then design is not research, it's just design. But if you approach design as research, then it's really a process of discovering and gaining insights. The question is, then, as you say, where does one enter the project and how does one inhabit the project? Do you start again, macro, micro? Do you start with the area statement? What do you start with? Do you always have to start at the top? Or can you enter the project at another point on its life cycle? And, and it does that help then, this idea of what we're saying, this non-linearity. Must everything have a stable formal representation, or can things have a fleeting spatiality? Does one need to control the design process, product, and to what extent? What is at stake in not always knowing? Is the design process embodied, physical, full of anxiety, investment? I mean, this is a good sign. If you're willing to tolerate that, if you're willing to tolerate that anxiety, that uncertainty, and it's quite a physical and quite a visceral, experience. Is it? This is something that I'm always interested in. That this kind of an investment into the project. And then, how do you define a successful project? Is it a formal resolution of the project, or is it the operative complexities, or is it both? And how do you decide that? Who decides that? And then finally, what has been learned and what has been discovered? How did we, by engaging in design projects, design studio, both as students and as faculty, did we learn a little bit more about why we design and how we design? Did we learn that? So I think these are some of the main things that I find quite interesting in my practice as an educator, and I'm happy that I got the chance to share this with you today. With that, I close my presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you, Anuradha, for that exceptional presentation. And indeed, as Frans Johansson would say, innovation happens at the intersection. With that, I'd like to open the floor for questions. Do post your questions on the chat. How do we keep the city as our laboratory alive? And can you reflect on what Ola, is this yesterday's question, Ankush? And can you reflect on what Ola Bauman said yesterday? Architecture is too important to be left only to architects.
Is that a question for me?
I'm wondering too. Let me just check that. Yes, yes, Anuradha, that's a question for you.
Can you, Mamta, can you repeat that question if you don't mind?
Definitely. So the question is, how do we keep the city as our laboratory alive? And can you reflect on what Ola Bauman said yesterday? Architecture is too important to be left only to architects.
So I'm not sure about what was discussed yesterday.
All right, so could we just move on to Rohan's comment and then we'll come back to that. He says, thank you for that. I was interested in your conception of the surface and the role of performativity as a strategy for feminist and queer theory.
Thank you.
Would you like to say something more about that, Anuradha?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I probably can't go too much into detail, but I think I'm always interested in surface, and I talk about it in one of the chapters. So the first project that I showed is in fact published in a book chapter where I talk about this a little bit more as to how the surface sort of, I mean, I'm simplifying it. I hope it's not miscommunicated, but in the sense that it is, it's a status of women who are always there, overexposed, but never considered important. So so we talked about the disciplinary unconscious. The unconscious is kind of compared to the feminine, and so the feminine in architecture is a surface, which is also always called decorative, and it's overexposed, so therefore it's not valued. So, in this, like through these projects, I think it was very interesting to see what are the potentialities, what happens when you design from outside in. And like I said, also interested in the feminist angle also comes in when you say this idea of control is very patriarchal, that you let go. And taking that feminist idea of letting go and not having this control on design. I remember when I did this specific project, the jurors were very uneasy with this fact that how can you not know? I mean, how do you the fact that somebody's paying for this building per square meters, right? So so this idea that the designer must be in control, it's a very patriarchal idea. So I think this idea of the gaze as well, this like top-down view on the plan is a very specific view, as much as a perspective is a certain kind of a gaze, and the plan is a very certain kind of a gaze, and that has this idea that that you're in charge, you're in control of every corner and every square meter of the building, and it's just really challenging that idea. But also, what are the potentialities? All these untapped, embedded potentialities, the unknown. I think I was very interested in that. So I think these are kind of different things that are coming together. It's kind of I kind of connect my my PhD, which is in architectural history and theory, my interest in feminist thinking, my interest in studio education. So I think projects like this really kind of triangulate some of these concerns into a design project. I hope that helps. Thanks, Mamta.
Yeah, thank you, Anuradha. We have another question.
Yeah.
Drashti says, thank you for the presentation. How would the unconventional methodology of designing from the outside to the within be practically perceived?
Practically by, I suppose, I think she's asking practically by architects. I suppose these are in some sense speculative academic projects, but I suppose if you want to do this in your real practice, I suppose architects probably wouldn't do it, but then some architects might. I really think it depends on your on which projects you really want to have fun with, and if I'm not sure about the perception, but I think the question is really should really be about whether you really will have the time to kind of meander and play when you're in practice, and whether your schedule and your time will tolerate that level of meandering. Probably not, but also depends. Certain projects might be more speculative projects, and you might want to engage in that as a kind of as experimentations for real projects, I suppose.
Right, Anuradha. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. I'd now like to hand it over to Sandeep to take it on from here.
Thank you.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee, for that thought-provoking lecture, and thanks, Mamta, for anchoring the session. We now move to the second set of student presentations, loosely clubbed under the theme of City, Nature. There are 3 presentations in this session. The first one is by Prachi Shah, titled Reconceptualizing the Food Web. Over to you, Prachi.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yes, we can. You can start sharing your presentation as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Can that be made full screen, Prachi?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. You're good to go.
Yeah. So, okay. So food is a part of our cultural identity. Many a times it indicates where we come from. So a large portion of our population is thereby involved in food production. As we see, around 42% of our population is involved in agricultural sector, whereas it contributes just 16% to the total GDP. Of all the employees, farmers earn the lowest of all. So in an ideal situation, farmer could directly sell the produce to the farmer could directly sell the produce to the consumer via a I'm so sorry, one second. Just a second. Can I just start presenting again? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I continue? Okay.
Your screen is not visible anymore.
Okay. One second. I'll just share. Is it visible?
No, not yet.
Yeah. Is it visible now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So in an ideal situation, a farmer could directly sell his produce to the end user via a market. However, in reality in India, there is an evident bottleneck which restricts the farmer to do so. Okay. So let us study the food flow in Mumbai city. Farmers around Mumbai have 3 options. Sell their produce to the government at MSP, which is the minimum support price, which is however not available for majority products. sell it to the regional markets, which has less consumption rate. Hence, the only option left is the Vashi APMC. From the APMC, the commission agents sell the farmers' produce to dealers at other APMCs, the BMC markets, to large hotels and restaurant chains or corporate sellers. Street vendors, small restaurants and other local traders buy their goods from the BMC markets. We can clearly see in this diagram that there exists a bottleneck, which is the APMC. Food takes at least 3 to 4 days to reach to the consumer, which increases the wastage and cascades the commission at every stage. Due to this, farmers get a meager share of the amount that we pay. More recently, an increasingly popular concept of market is a farmer's market, where the farmer and the end user come in direct contact. Such markets are really beneficial for the farmers as well as the consumers because multitudes of middlemen can be eliminated. This helps the farmers to earn a fair price and consumers to get fresh produce. Such markets are organized by NGOs, hence they are inconsistent in nature. This lack of flexibility causes inconvenience to both the farmers and the consumers. Farmers have to plan their harvest in advance, and many a times their produce quality starts to degrade before they could reach the market. Thus, the current thesis tries to integrate a farmer's market to an existing market in order to create a hybrid structure such that it can also be used as an exhibition center, a culinary school, office space, and restaurants. Thus, we aim to reconceptualize the food web by redeveloping the existing BMC market, which would be farmer friendly. It could even be by circumventing the layers of middlemen. Hence, it will minimize the wastage of food and promote healthy eating habits. By doing this, we will establish a direct relationship between the farmers and the consumers, and hence we will be proposing a new market module for the future markets. So this is the site that I've selected. So the current Borivali BMC market is located centrally in a complex environment. The municipal market and the law and order programs are divided by one vehicular road in between. There are 3 main programs that dominate the movement and the workability on site. Those are the railway station, the market, and the law and order. Market opens towards the SV road, and thus it forms a bottleneck for the moving traffic as vendors occupy a sizable space outside the market. Present skywalk does not have strategic openings, which renders to an urban void. Thus, this market can be redeveloped as a transit hub. Traffic congestion can be reduced and skywalk can be utilized to redirect the movement patterns. So these are a few site organization, the present site organization with a few site images. This is the area statement, which provides a comparison between the existing and the proposed market programs. Okay. So now let's discuss the concept of the proposed building. So the gray area carves out the vehicular circulation from the massing. The idea at this step is to cascade building and to keep the upper floors light, which would create different hierarchy of spaces at different levels. It being a market, it is important to determine the service core at regular intervals. Furthermore, the idea is to have a scaffolding which will allow porosity. The plinth is designed as a platform for the farmers market, which is a temporal structure. It can also be used for other recreational activities. Further, the idea here is to break down the massing sectionally by letting the ground floor be the market space and the higher floors for the hybrid programs. An important element is to incorporate the skywalk, which bridges between the programs. Lastly, the use of the aesthetic and a lightweight roof, which encompasses the building, gives a singular and a unique identity to the hybrid structure and would also provide shelter to the porous structure beneath, allowing good ventilation of hot air. Okay, so the plinth is primarily designed for a farmer's market. So this figure shows the vehicular movement around the structure. The ground floor is divided into 4 different markets, starting from the left, the fish market, vegetable market, formal, and the flea market. This is the pedestrian circulation on this floor, and it is uncoiled and simple, providing connectivity to both the ends. The first floor consists of the hybrid programs such as the seafood restaurant, culinary school, and exhibition spaces. This figure shows the pedestrian circulation on the first floor. This is the last floor, and it consists of the BMC offices, restaurant, and the formal market on the skywalk. This figure shows the pedestrian circulation on the second floor. So now let us discuss the ground floor plan. It is a 180 by 50 meter island plot surrounded by roads on all the four sides. The southern facade faces a court building. It faces a court building and is adjacent to the market road. This side of the building is heavily crowded. Thus, the plinth is designed to allow a free flow in and out of the market. The eastern side of the market lies adjacent to the SV road, which is the main road. Hence, a direct access to the basement parking of loading and unloading zone for trucks is provided on this side in order to avoid traffic congestion. Ramps have been provided for the ease of the loading and unloading of the trucks. So the building has a central aisle of columns, which are different from the building structure. So the ground floor plan is divided into 4 markets, as said before, but it is with a distance of 30 meters, like it has staircases at every 30 meters. Now let's focus on like the individual markets. So first is the fish market. The fish market is purposefully sidelined. It is to avoid the foul odor, and it is designed like a centrally air-conditioned glass box. This would even provide lower temperatures for the fishes. These are a few details of the galas. And now moving on to the vegetable market. So the vegetable market has different gala clusters on both the sides of the aisle. Every cluster has a work and life typology. Where on the lower level, the galas can be used for trade, and for the upper level, it can be used for storage or living space. Every cluster has a waste collection and storage room. Next is the formal market. So in the formal market, the plinth merges into the market, creating informal spaces and small seating gestures. The market has a huge storage space and waste collection shared by all the galas. This market is repeated on the first floor. And lastly, the flea market is diagonally oriented and So last is the flea market, which is diagonally oriented and has access to the main road. The purpose of the flea market is to rent galas and shops on temporary basis for festivals and workshops, even for temporary basis as well. So this is the farmers market. The relationship between the farmers market and the flea market is evident from the picture. The small seating gestures by the plinth can be utilized by the farmers for trade. So this is the first floor plan. The first floor consists of the hybrid programs such as the seafood restaurant, exhibition center, culinary school, and small organic farm. The formal market is extended on the first floor. These are a few views of the first floor. This is a view from the exhibition center. This is a view of the formal market. This is the second floor plan. The second floor plan consists of a hybrid program such as the rooftop restaurant and the BMC offices. The skywalk is incorporated into the building, which would provide a bridge between the programs. Since skywalk is connected to the railway station, it would encourage people to enter the market and thus change the movement pattern. The skywalk has small landscape gestures, giving it aesthetics of the sky garden. So now these are a few views from the second floor from the skywalk. This is a view of the building from the skywalk. This is the front elevation. This is the fish market elevation, the vegetable market, formal market, and the flea market. The sections. Okay. So this is the cross section through the fish market. This is the cross section through the vegetable market. The basement there's a basement as well, and the basement provides a parking space. The ground floor shows the vegetable gala clusters with rental and storage above it. The first floor shows the exhibition center, and the second floor shows the kitchen and the rooftop. This is a formal market. These are a few isometric views of the building. And the conclusion is that so there should be a new module for the market that has been proposed. This new market module will prove instrumental in establishing a direct relationship between the consumer and the farmers. The new concept of food web would help farmers to attain fair prices for their produce. The aesthetic of the building would complement the context. The hybrid programs would revolutionize the nation of a market, and a better utilization of the skywalk would help fill the urban void. Finally, the module sets a standard for the future development of the new market in the city. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prachi. Now we would request the panelists to respond.
Would you like to go first? Or should I go first?
Yeah, I can go. Prachi, thank you for that presentation. Very interesting project. I have two questions for you, Prachi.
Okay.
One is that I think you guys would have started the design dissertation at when was it first?
2019.
Yeah, which month? Is this pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Pre-COVID. Like we started with the research before that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking one was related to that, Prachi, the idea of whether, I mean, it's just a thought and a conversation really. I mean, how would, these kinds of buildings be designed or redesigned, the typology rethought in the post-pandemic phase? And the second question, Prachi, is that you would have definitely, in part of your research, you would have definitely talked to farmers, and I wonder if you could talk a bit more about what those issues are and some of those stories. So I have two questions, Prachi, if that's okay. You can just go. Thank you.
Okay. So one question of yours is very much related to the present situation, like the protests that are happening. Okay, so one is that definitely the farmers are getting exploited in APMC because of the middlemen. They're not getting fair prices. But my perspective on this is like they're getting exploited by the farmers as like by the APMC as well. And in future, if the laws are being regulated, like if the laws are happening, so if there is no APMC, then what about the farmers who are at a small scale, like farmers who have like mass production? They will have contracts with the definitely with the private sector as well. But in this case also, there are like great, like majority of the farmers are of a small scale, and they will be left out here as well. So
sorry to interrupt you. Did you get the chance to speak to anybody? Because I'm although I can understand with the pandemic, that must have been something that was not possible.
Yeah, definitely. I spoke to a few farmers. Like I'd even had a site visit to APMC, and I spoke to farmers there as well. So definitely, and I had even done a visit to the farmers market, which was being held in Bandra. So there is definitely a satisfaction that farmers feel when it's a farmers market, because the rate or the prices that they can propose, or the benefit that they get is much more. And it's same from the consumer's perspective as well. When you buy from a farmer's market, the consumers feel much more secure. They feel that you're getting a product which is directly from the farmer. So concerning both the perspectives, like the reviews and the opinions were that is much more convenient.
And then my second question was about how such building typologies need to be, how, to what extent were you able to consider, pandemics, current or future, and how that might have an effect on the way we reconceptualize such typologies, these large, bulky enclosed buildings, which are taking in a lot of crowd. So what are you don't have to say that you solved it. I was just wondering, did you think about it, and what were your struggles
Okay, so 1 second. So these are like two different questions, right? Like one, you're talking about the pandemic, and one you're just asking me if it's like a solving. And okay, so one about the pandemic, I feel is definitely it's a large scale structure where it would include a lot of number of people. And so basically, but the pandemic is a situation that hardly, it's like it's been once in like 100 years or something. So but if you see the situation of the market in like the normal days, okay, so the whole area is like there is a lot of congestion in that area. And just by changing the module of, or by redeveloping the module of the market itself, you will be able to it would influence the whole circulation and the movement pattern as well. So
thank you.
Prachi, thank you so much for your very clear presentation. I think you start off with a very clear problem setting. I think it's very relevant. You explain it very clearly, and it's quite convincing, I would say. It also has this very kind of human-centered design approach, which I think fits very well with your subject. My question is maybe a little bit on an abstract level, so I'm curious to see if you how you relate to this, because I think you give architecture a very strong role in solving a problem, I would say, or dealing with this problem. I was wondering, how sure of you are you that actually architecture can solve this problem in your specific project? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay, so I definitely don't think that this is like 100% solution to it. This is just on an conceptual level. This is just an idea that has been proposed. So that's the reason I call this to be a module, because the type of programs that I have involved, the circulation that I'm talking about, it caters to mass, like it caters to a large number of people, and the scale is comparatively still smaller. So this is just a module or an idea that would just work out. So that's how, I'm just taking it. This is not like something even I feel that, it would just, solve all the problems. But this is, the project itself is an idea or a concept that I'm just trying to get in, like the idea of a hybrid structure, which would just try to involve all or cater to all the kind of people around. Or it would, even if you start getting these hybrid programs with the farmers market, it would even share the responsibility of the maintenance of the building, or it would, there would be interactions of all kind of people. So the idea is like, so yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but
yes, very much. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Prachi, for the presentation. Just one or two small things. One is about, do you think one is your catchment area for the market is already established, I suppose.
Yeah.
The people who are coming. So are you seeing, do you see that there could be a change in profile of who might find it more appealing once you get fresher vegetables and a quicker, transaction happening from farm to the table? Do you see that it could cut short or change the profile of consumers?
Okay, so so this is like a main reason why it is called a hybrid structure, because there is not only the farmers market. If it was only the farmers market, I would definitely, agree to this point that definitely there might just be a certain amount of people who would get influenced, or, who would feel to go into that building, or who would get attracted to that building. But that's where I have given a lot of importance to the circulation and the movement as well in the project, because there are like huge number of people who keep traveling through the railways, and if they start using the skywalk, and if there's a roof garden on the top level, definitely there would be people who would just want to use that. That would even become like a shortcut for people to just travel from one place to another. So this building has as a whole, definitely it influences people, and it definitely changes the movement pattern. And
you mentioned about a place to stay, which was one line.
Yeah. Okay. So that was.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it was not a place. Sorry. Sorry, I thought you continued.
So they have the shop below, and they have extra storage or a place to stay for them.
Yeah.
So,
okay. So.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You can continue. So sorry.
Yeah. Start.
Okay. Yeah. So so it's not like a place to stay, but it's just like so right now in APMC also, the typology is like a live and work typology. It's not that people stay there, but it's just like a storage area for them. But there are a few people who, treat their storage area as their live space as well, because they don't wish to travel so much or what. So for that, so it's just like the same typology that I've got, like I'm inspired from this work and live typology from the APMC.
So a small last question, which is about the structure. Your steel structures seems to be going right to the roof, and the other part, which is the major bulk of the structure, that seems to be independent of that. Was there a particular reason why you did that?
Yeah, okay. So I've definitely there's a reason for that because so when I started designing, okay, it being a market, I had like I had like two opinions for the same this thing. So it being a market, I had one opinion was that it should be a structure that that is pretty porous, that is very open, so that it's easily accessible, and there is due to ventilation, all these reasons. So that was one reason why I went for a scaffolding structure and to make it very open. But it being a market itself, it needs to have some shell, it needs to be covered due to because of the weather conditions or because of the harsh sun in Bombay. So that's the reason I gave like a whole, independent lightweight roof structure on top, which I wanted it to be independent from the structure so that, it doesn't take the load, like the structure doesn't have to take the load of it. And because of that, the structure doesn't need to be like a closed structure or, like that.
Thanks, Prachi.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prachi, and thank you, panelists, for that wonderful discussion. So now we can move on to the next presentation. It's by Suraj Thorat, and his dissertation is titled Aarey and the City. Over to you, Suraj. Hi, Suraj. You may have to unmute yourself and start sharing the presentation too.
So, is there?
Your screen is not visible yet, Suraj.
Now?
Yes, now we can see.
Uh, so my thesis title is Aarey into City. So it's reimagination of city and forest age. So thesis is focused on Aarey Forest, which is located in Goregaon, Mumbai, adjacent to the Sanjay Gandhi National Park. Mumbai is the one of the very few city in the world which has forest within its boundary. There has been century-old relationship between city and forest. Mumbai and forest have established a complex socio-cultural and ecological relationship. After the establishment of Aarey Colony in 1954, the government chose to neglect all the ecological aspect of forests uh, and began to allocate the land for various infrastructure projects. Uh, RML colony has shrunk because of this different project. The land for cattle gathering firewood, forest for getting paddy, etc., which has been used as a common, are now getting commodified. This is going to result in ecological diversification of forest, and the rich greenery would be replaced by more and more concrete jungle. This encroachment is the result of idea that forest land is commodity. The land in the forest is seen as a real estate property, whereas the forests comprise of micro and macro ecosystem, Adivasi settlements, and diverse range of wildlife. So, question arises that Can architecture be the instrument in finding an ecological sensitive approach toward the treatment of the age of the forest, such that propose alternative program and preventive destructive development and help in sustaining the existing ecosystem that in doing so, can it validate the existence of ancient forest dweller and intervene such that their socio-cultural aspects are visible to the people of the city? So thesis intent is to understand the complex relationship at edge of nature and infrastructure and offer a lens to pursue and develop this ecosystem, which will establish a symbiotic relationship for positive growth of the region. So administration is constantly trying to prove how beneficiary is the ongoing development at the edge of the forest on the basis of some calculation and statistics by the influence of Western idea of world-class city. State come up with the idea like making zoo in the center of forest by destructing the forest. So some background of Aarey. Aarey colony is known for the massive variety of flora and fauna. It has 77 species of bird, 34 species of wildlife, 86 species of butterfly, 13 species of amphibian, 16 species of mammals, and 90 different species of spider. Several newly discovered species of scorpion and spider have been found here. Any development activity could endanger, especially the ones unique to us. So these are the some timeline which Aarey developed. So in all development, there is a negligible consideration shown but the ecological aspect and socio-cultural relationship between people and the land. So this map show the vegetation of Aarey, and the red line demarcate the proposed project site in the development plan of 2034 for the metro car shed, botanical garden, housing. So this will result the amount of vegetation destruction of all kind and also break the last corridor connecting Aarey and Sanjay Gandhi National Park. So this is the watershed and stream map. The major river of Mumbai, Mithi and Oshiwara, originated from Sanjay Gandhi National Park and Aarey. So their maximum catchment area in the Aarey. So here the map of Aarey, where I study all the edges of Aarey through the series of transects and focus on this edge. So these are some transects. So an attempt is made to study the relationship between the city and forest by mapping one of the forest city edge. It includes the SRPF camp and Nausada Pada, which is tribal settlement. The SRPF camp is an urban development on the forest which was formed in 1977 by clearing the forest. So these transects drawn from the conjecture gathered by discussion with the local on the site. This transect is before 1976 and this is now. So this is another transect. So an attempt to make the study to change that occur when the crossing the forest boundary change in the socio-cultural fabric and the landscape. This include the Obera building on the one side and the another. There are the tabela. So this is the third transect. So this includes the area where the metro car shed is being built and the surrounding Adivasi Pada and river. The metro car shed are around 80 acres. The river flowing down the hillock and meeting the Mithi river pass through this land. During the monsoon, when the Mithi river is flooded, this area acts as a flood plain. So this try to examine this area. So these are the some daily food which forest community uses. So the study of the age, activity, livelihood, relationship, and ecological mapping through cross sections. So these are the series of map to identify the sites for intervention. So these are the housing typology, then social infrastructure map. So this is land use, road network map. So this is a commercial establishment. There's a terrain map. So this is a natural water stream network. So a natural water stream network map that studies the existing terrain to generate natural water flow lines. The major stream happen to come on the edge of concretized development, which curbs its flow and cause heavy flooding in low-lying area. The blue circle diagrammatically represent the proposed water body that can act as a catchment area to prevent the flooding. So this is a drainage network map. The current drainage system consists of concrete channels that run parallel to the highway, which don't allow water seep in. So this red thing is the barrier between the city and forest. So this is the possible node of interaction where we can put our interventions. So project intent is to develop the sustainable intervention along the edge of remaining forest and develop the architecture that evolves in content. By doing so, it's aimed to create symbiotic relationship between the nature and the humans. So this is a master plan. So these are the four sites where on the first side there is a seed bank, on second side there is a cultural center, on the third there is animal care center, and this is a Salaskar Bagh. So I imagine as a market and the bagh. So the master plan allow one to cycle around and experience the life of the forest and get glimpse of Adivasi padas, ponds, indigenous species of animal, cattle shed, etc. through different texture of material and atmosphere generated by the track. Porous stone, rubble, elevated steel ramp, etc. Different point keeping in mind the condition of the space. So this is a seed bank, which is site number 1. So the metro casting yard will get abandoned as soon as, so this is a metro casting yard now. So after the metro casting yard will be get abandoned as soon as the construction of the metro line will get completed. The intervention intend to receive the land by using Miyawaki process, which is for the forest which will require human care for 2 years. It is imagined to be the fruit forest with maximum native species, which can become the livelihood option for the Adivasis with zero maintenance. It will also have a seed bank that will study, store, research, and distribute seed locally available in Aarey, and have demonstration camp to explain how to plant them. It will also have small cafe, reading space, gallery space that will educate its visitor by displaying information about the native species of the tree and grown here. So this is the Miyawaki process. So first, in this case, remove the concrete bed, then old stream of the region slowly will get revived and get, so these are the landscape strategy. So this is the site plan. So this is the wall. So existing concrete wall will be removed to construct 3 layers of stone wall to avoid landslide and allow water percolation. Landscape will take over naturally, and the wall will slowly ruin and merge with the landscape. So first, and then these spaces are used to stabilize the initial stage of foresting, and this big plant will take over the landscape. So this is the ground floor plan where so this is the seed bank building. So there is a different function like seed storage, moisture testing section, and then this is the cafe. So this is another level. So this is a toilet, exhibition space, a cafe, a reading space, and so these are the sections. So a landscape is a design functionally such that the particular vegetation occupies distinct spaces in the vicinity of the structure. The design replaces the existing concretized landscape with a sensitive natural landscape that nurture the environment and through time rebuild the flora and fauna. Uh, so this is the second section. So the structure is designed such that it float over the sloping terrain, allow for the ground to be taken over by natural fauna. The function of the seed bank happen on the deck above without hampering the natural cycle of the region. So this is the cross section of seed bank. So this is the
Hi, Suraj. Hi, Suraj. You've actually taken more than 10 minutes. So if you can quickly go through the rest of the slides, it'll be.
Yeah, okay.
Sure.
So
thank you.
So this is the cultural center. So this is the animal care center. So it is a geographical depression that acts as a space to collect water. So these are the landscape strategy and design strategy. So these are the plans. So this is a long section. So this is the cross section of the building. Some details. So these are isometric section of that. So this is a productive garden. So this is the last site. So Salaskar Bagh is a walled garden which has concretized all the natural stream that enter it. It concretized and walling cut it off from the city, ignoring the rich ecology of lot of interacting stream. The interactive intent to open up the garden toward the city as well as the forest to be able to generate new relationship in the ecosystem through the market space that open up toward the Aarey. Thank you.
Thank you, Suraj. You may stop sharing the screen and we would request you to come on camera. Over to you, panelists.
Suraj, thank you so much for your presentation. I think quite an original project. I really like the mapping and the research you did. I think it was also quite important, of course, to emphasize this still a little bit of nature in the city. I really like the idea of the seed bank. Liked your drawings, and I also liked the kind of the promotion you did of cycling, which makes the connection of nature. My question would be, you strongly focus on preserving the environment, this fragile piece of land. I was wondering, how difficult was it for you to imagine putting a construction there, even though you do emphasize the fact that it really almost doesn't really affect it? Still, it's a construction in the site. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
So I tried to construct in such a way that that building will dismantle, and if we don't need that building, we can easily dismantle, and nature will like come over. So nature will take.
Thank you.
So Mitra, I'll go after you.
Okay. Thank you, Suraj, for the nice presentation. Did you find anything which you think that you could not grapple with in the project as a kind of as an ecology? Did you sense something which is missing?
I don't think so. Sorry, I don't.
Okay, no, I think you done a good attempt and quite an inventive and an important project, you know. Yeah, I really don't have a comment or a particular question beyond that. Anuradha, you take it further.
I agree with the panelists. I think it was very interesting, very detailed, very important project, Suraj. So I enjoyed that. I always have a question about projects for students. Like, what was the personal reason for selecting this project? There's always a reason. We always spend 5 years and we gravitate towards certain things. So Suraj, if it's okay with you, if you can talk a little bit more about what drew you personally to this project.
So when we had started to studying thesis, so then there was a protest happening on Aarey, like for Aarey casting yard. So that I think fascinates me. So I thought.
That's all right. I think, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Suraj.
Thank you, Suraj, and thank you, panelists. We can move on to the next presentation. This is the last presentation of the day, and it is by Saloni Kapoor, and it's titled Rendering Visibility, Urban Waste Infrastructure of Mumbai. Over to you, Saloni.
Hi, thank you so much. Is my screen visible?
It is, indeed. You can make it full screen if it's possible. Control L.
Okay, yeah. So hi everyone, a very good evening. I'll be presenting my undergrad thesis, Rendering Visibility, Urban Waste Infrastructure of Mumbai. So the thesis aims to address the invisibilization of the urban waste infrastructure, and it explores the role of architecture in making the infrastructure visible. My research started with categorizing the infrastructure into 4 different scales: the street, the neighborhood, the ward, and the city. Here is a map of Mumbai marking out the most important spaces that cater to the urban waste infrastructure here, like the refuse transfer stations, scrap markets, and the dumping grounds, and also the offices. For my neighborhood level research, I chose the D ward, where I mapped out like the similar spaces which are important for the waste infrastructure in the world. So with the help of the data, I created waste narratives, which helped me understand the flow of waste, how it's handled, and also the movement of people and vehicles. But most importantly, the visibility and the invisibility of the waste, which I'll explain further, which is marked in the yellow and the red in my drawings. So, and also like in my research, you'll come across the spaces which like, exist in that particular scale. Like in the neighborhood level, there's the collection spots, the stationary compactors. These are the narratives built at the neighborhood scale, which was done with my fieldwork at the D ward. So the lens of visibility, which I use for my project, is it does not solely signify like solely observation, but also it tries to highlight the state of materiality and the nature in which the waste is being recognized. So at the neighborhood level, at the ward level, we have the scrap markets and the dry waste collection centers and the refuse transfer stations. Here I've taken the example of the Mahalakshmi transfer station, which is in the middle of our city. So if you see, the very nature of the infrastructure contributes to the invisibilization, held by huge boundary walls and entirely cut off from its context. At the city level, we have the landfills. Here we see the majestic Deona dumping ground. So these dumping grounds exist along the fringes of the city. It is away from the eyes of the consumer. So with the help of these narratives, I built a waste chain diagram, which helped me understand the movement of waste, how it's constantly at flux from the source to the collection and transportation to the dumping grounds along the edges. So with my research, I came up with these following questions: that how we can come up with a decentralized urban infrastructure that that does not create unjust geographies along the peripheries, how the infrastructure can destigmatize waste and also the people associated with it, and also how it can open new paradigms for interaction between the infrastructure and the public. So the new infrastructure aims to render, well, it aims to render visible the materiality of waste, and the people who are most important here are the rag pickers and the raddiwalas of the existing system. The materials that are not dealt with at the source are transferred to the resource transfer station. The resource transfer station is no more transferring merely refuse. It is creating a waste ecology and treating waste as a resource. From here, it goes to the material recovery facility, which I'm proposing at the ward level. For my project, I will be dealing with the neighborhood scale. So the module consists of programs that, so this is the program menu, and it has programs related to handling waste. It has amenities for the staff, and also it tries to open new paradigms for public engagement. So here I started experimenting with what the architecture of a transfer station needs to be. Here the core function is handling materials which are brought in. They undergo first level of sorting and processing on the floors above, and the materials are then loaded onto trucks and moved to the material recovery facility, which is the ward level facility. So the module comprises of forms and forms which help in storage and transfer of materials, and the language is kept pretty playful, but it's it's purposeful at the same time. Then the module can be contextualized with some plugin programs according to the need of the site. So the site that I've chosen is Durga Devi Udyan, which is the BMC garden in the Sea Ward. Why I chose a garden is because I wanted to merge the two realms of the public and the infrastructure and see how both of them can exist close to each other. The context of the site here, like the school, the reading room, the water tank, and also the BMC garden, it really helped me to explore what can the different wings of the waste infrastructure be. These are the road network maps of the existing site. So the existing ecology in which the site sits is a very bustling recycling market, and it falls along the MS Ali Road. And I with my infrastructure, I aim that it becomes like the intervention becomes an active part of this infrastructure, of this fabric, sorry. So the two plots that are existing are right now divided by a road, and I propose to divert the road so that I can put my waste facility along the edge of the garden. Here is like a concept master plan where you see the resource transfer station. I've put a material library and a balwadi. I've put a Vachnalaya on top of the existing study room, which also connects to the municipal garden. Then there's the composting station, and above that is an administration office for the site. And also opening up the water tank for weekly bazaars. This is the master plan. This is the resource transfer station. This is the balwadi. This is the study room on top of which the Vachnalaya sits. The composting station, a public toilet, and this is the garden and the water tank. So the resource transfer station, here you see that there's a constant push and pull with the footprint, which I've tried to play with so that different interactions can be developed with the garden. The plan, it allows easy movement from the street to the garden. The chowki and the material transfer station, it sits at the edge of the site so that the movement of the trucks is easier from the main road. The plug-in programs include a material drop-off station, a market for second-hand goods, and basic amenities for the working staff. Here is a program diagram. This diagram shows the circulation of waste, how it is dropped off to the basement. It travels up, and how it comes down after sorting and processing and gets loaded onto trucks, the movement of staff members and the public. Here is an exploded axo showing all the flow plates. This is the basement floor, which is a transfer floor for moving the materials to the floor above. This is the floor at this floor is like a multi-purpose floor, which can transform into a weekly bazaar space. And the floor above is for cleaning, processing, and sorting the waste. This is the small mezzanine which sits on top of this. So for the structure, the structure is made of fabricated steel members, which can be locally sourced. Around the site. There are like multiple steel fabrication units, and also they work closely with the construction and demolition market. So the materials which are good for use are procured from. So like it tries to repurpose the construction demolition waste as well in the structure. This is like the unit, like a single unit which can be repeated according to the size of the site. So the facade systems is something that I try to play with. Here, this is the facade on the first floor. So what it tries to do is it tries to respond to the activities that are happening on that particular time and day. So like on a regular day, it can act as a fenestration, it can be opened up. And on the day of the market, it can open up to form a flow plate, and it can be used for like setting up shops. Then I've used these screens, which are made of pulpet bottles, which are stacked together and held in like a rebar frame, and which can be easily procured from the market, and also like from the sorting and collection which happens in the program. So this is the section that cuts through the floor above, which is the multi-purpose space. You can see the facade systems which are in place. So it's like the heavy steel structure floats on top, and the ground is pretty free for people to move across from the street to the garden. This is cutting through the loading and unloading platform, and it shows like new interactions which the building is like having with the context. So to explain the rest of the structure, I would like to do it along in the way of a narrative. So if so the rack pickers and the raddiwalas are now, like I call them, the resource collectors. So what their day will be like in the new infrastructure. So here I'm taking an example of a resource collector. So she starts her door-to-door rounds at 7 a.m. She collects recyclables from homes and offices. She arrives at the municipal chowki, shows her ID, and heads to the material drop-off station over here, where she's dropping off her recyclables. She's also accompanied by her daughter, who will spend the day at the balwadi while the mother works at the sorting station. After completing her duty, the resource collector. So this is the floor above where she will be working at the sorting station. Here are some views. So after her duty is over, she goes to the ground floor locker and she collects her belongings and picks up her daughter. They spend some time in the park before they head home for the day. The second character which I've chosen is a municipal ground staff, the one who sweeps the streets and makes daily rounds in the morning. So every morning he arrives at 6 at the chowki. After a short briefing from the muqaddam, he heads for his rounds. After the sweeping rounds, he drops off the leaf and the debris waste at the composting station, which is sitting at the edge of the site. He also collects a bag of fresh compost for his own garden. These are some views of the composting station, and also, yeah, just need 2 more minutes. And also on top of the composting station, there is an administration office that is handling the activities on site. So after he's done with his work, he goes and takes a shower, has a cup of tea, and he heads to the Vachanalaya, which is like the reading room, which I've provided on top of the existing study room. Third, I've picked as what kind of interactions would the residents have with the infrastructure. So the residents, they can drop off their recyclables at the material drop-off station. Like they can drive in with their car and drop it off, and in exchange of that, they can get some tokens with which they can buy second-hand goods from the shop and also from the weekly bazaar that happens on site. So it's like pure exchange of material. The kids can do workshops at the material library. The material library treats waste as material and tries to explore new materials, and it also works as an extension to the school, which is here at the corner of the site. Here are some views into the space. And lastly, we have the water tank, which right now is held by some heavy fencing, which I'm planning to replace by flexible railing, which can turn into a scaffolding, which can be used to set up shops during the weekly bazaar. Here is an overall axonometric of the site. I would like to end with this quote. Larger than life, but part of it, infrastructure has an immediate presence. It shapes our environment and urban life in vital, authentic, and often messy ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saloni. Over to the panelists.
Hi.
Anybody would like to go first? Should I start? Kapoor, right? If I got your name correct?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much, Kapoor, for your very interesting project and presentation. I think, again, it's a very relevant project. There were a few ones that we had to judge dealing with waste, so I think it's a very topical subject. I think you really ask very relevant questions, very detailed, but I think what really lifts the project out of maybe some others, and I think what is quite special of yours is, of course, the materialization you showed here and the use of waste in that. I have a question about that as well, because in this way of using this waste, it is almost as if you're, say, glorifying this waste. While I think as a society in general, we try to, of course, aim for less waste, because waste also means an attack on our environment and bad for the world, etc., etc. So I was wondering how you relate to that on the one hand, maybe sort of glorification of waste, and if you considered also finding ways of arguing that we should have less waste. I hope my question is clear.
Yeah. So as part of my research book, I had included this chapter where I talk about how we need to create a circular economy, which is particular to waste. So materials which cannot be recycled should not be created like in the first place itself. If I cannot recycle this packet of chips, there has to be a change made at the production level. So I want to create like a cognitive loop, you can say, with the help of these infrastructures which are there in our immediate surroundings, so that we see that this is not getting recycled. So what do we do about it? So I am definitely not glorifying waste. Definitely there has to be a change in how we use materials and how the materials can have like a loop in which they like return to something, and then they're not like ending up in the landfills without any purpose.
Thank you so much for that, Kapoor.
Thank you.
Anuradha, would you like to go in?
I don't really have any questions, Saloni. I think it was an interesting presentation. I think Jon's question is very interesting, actually, and I think we're all nodding along because I think they're definitely. I think a project like this appears as if it is definitely, it's kind of promoting the status quo. Is it? I think you. I don't know if you talked about it, but is there? When you're saying rendering visible, is there a visitors element to this part as well? A lot of students have talked about, public space and are consumers a part of this narrative? Because maybe I missed it, but did you talk about the consumers being a part of this narrative as well, where they understand what this is that they have created, that there's a kind of ownership to this?
Right. So the reason why I worked at the neighborhood scale was to create a very everyday interaction, than like, instead of a place where you visit for like you visit once a year, you go around as a visitor. But no, here you are part of that neighborhood. How is you are constantly going there to like exchange material, like to receive material, like you're visiting the markets, you are visiting the material library, which is showing you how like waste can be treated as a material. And the reason why it's incorporated with the garden is to create that public interaction as well. So there's a constant flow, and I want to do it in a very mundane way, not in a very majestic or monumental way, because waste is part of like our everyday. So the infrastructure as well has to be something that we like visiting, like you visit it very casually, like let's go and drop off these things. Like we have like it can be a part of it can be like a to-do list which we have like end of the week that we need to go and visit the place, and then it's like that. Like this is the kind of interaction that I wanted to build with the programs.
But are you confident that it will build in the level of sensitivity, sensitization that you're aiming for?
I think that is the most difficult step, I'm sure, because
yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's the most difficult, right? So it needs to start the project like before like building this building. I feel people need that there has to be a good marketing and sensitizing people about what like how important it is, like drawing people's attention. And unless and until they're actually into it, a thing like this cannot sit without the people, I feel, because otherwise it'll become something that people don't go to, like a landfill. Like a landfill is something that is definitely not worth the thing, but like I mean that the infrastructure wants to welcome people and invite the participation. So the first step is to inform them, have like a sensitive marketing campaign for that, and then like this is the step 2 of the project, I feel, in like the lineage of the process of building.
All right, thank you, Saloni.
Saloni, I have just one question,
yes,
which is about do you think the structure is generic enough to find change in itself, because it's not going to be perhaps the same forever, you know? So let's say if it was an industrial shed and or like an aircraft hangar, and one is able to do all the processes, and the area enclosed is, let's say, large enough to hold all the activities and have the segregations like what you have made, to make it little more non-specific. Do you think that will be operationally better in the long run as a structural system itself?
So sorry, I didn't get the question really. So are you suggesting that we should, I'm sorry, like could you please repeat, because I did not catch
that. Let's compare the plan the way it is versus just a large barn in which all these things happen, so that one can actually modify or find different uses at different times. So that's only about the structure, actually, the system that you're using.
Right. I think that can be the case, absolutely, because I mean, why I like intuitively from the site, it's a very bustling site, it's a very intense and dense site. So I wanted to really add value, like with my infrastructure, it should add some value in this extremely high density context, because no one would want a useless building over there. So I tried to incorporate, like the scale was thoda smaller, like it was not like a shed, because otherwise it can create that barrier between the people and the infrastructure. So I think like purely if I talk about handling waste, we can definitely go with a huge shed or like a hangar. And I'm sure that we can allow very easy installation of machinery, putting things, increase, like there can be truckloads of waste one day and there can be none one day. So it can allow for the flexibility, but like because it sits in a very sensitive context, because so I try to keep the scale a little smaller and would not go for something like that for this particular site, I think.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saloni, and thank you, panelists. So that was the last presentation for today. Actually, Dr. Chatterjee, your presentation seems to have had quite an effect on the faculty forum at KRVIA, and there are many more questions pouring in. We were wondering if you would like to take one or two of them since we have the time, or would you want to respond to them differently?
Oh dear, I think I've read questions by Dr. Binti Singh and Rohan Shivkumar. I need to think about Binti's question. I think that's very interesting. Rohan's question is more of the experience you have taught in many schools. Is that the one, Sandeep?
Yeah, you could probably respond to either of them or one of them, as per your convenience.
I think I'll respond to Rohan's. Binti's, I need to sleep over. I'll get back to tomorrow. Sure. I think just in terms of the kind of projects that are available, I think there isn't much of a difference. I think academic practice is probably the same as industry practice. Sometimes you get these dream projects, whether it's a teaching project or a building project, and then you really have fun with it. So in the sense, I mean, yeah, I mean, like the Surface Studio I've actually done in Sushant School, and Sydney and China. So there's been possibilities to kind of do that. I think, and on you also, I think it also depends, and there is no kind of, it's very hard to compare countries and pedagogic, I mean, learning cultures. I think I'm always interested in learning cultures. Of course, Indian students will learn in a certain way, as will Chinese students or European students. There's a kind of a culture of learning and teaching. But I think most of the students have been very open. I think it is whether the methodology, whether students want to get on board and come with you on the journey. It's exactly probably the same as Soumitra. You can talk about your clients, whether they want to come with you on that journey, and whether they trust you that this is going down a track. They want to go with you. So Sandeep, I think answering Rohan's question, I think it's been, I think, at least 4 or 5 projects in about a span of 18, 19 years. And I can really think they kind of stand out and saying, that these were really important projects that really that also make you as a practitioner, I think. Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you for that. I guess that really answers the question. So with this, we come to the end of an exciting day of lectures and presentations. On behalf of USM's KRVIA, we would like to thank our speakers today, Aniruddha Paul and Manoj Parmar, for articulating their thoughts in the morning session, Shri S.N. Kabraji and Shri Akshay Raheja for taking out time and being a part of the event. A big thank you to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Chatterjee, Soumitra, and Yon, for the detailed feedback and the responses to the students' work. A special thanks to Dr. Chatterjee and Soumitra for delivering those wonderful lectures that were indeed thought-provoking. We look forward to hearing your lecture tomorrow, Yon. And that reminds me, let me quickly give you a highlight of the program for tomorrow. We start at 1:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time in the afternoon to continue with the Design Dissertation Colloquium, the lectures and the students' presentations in a similar format as we did today, post which we will be inaugurating the KRVIA Elective Week exhibition, showcasing the students' output of the recently concluded electives as part of the Kamla Raheja Memorial Lecture Series. That will also be an online exhibition. And after that, there'll be the announcement of the 3 selected dissertation projects. And post that, we will conclude the lecture with a vote of thanks and the pitch for the future events which are planned as part of the larger umbrella of the Apocalypse Manifesto. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the KRVIA administration, faculty, and students team who have worked relentlessly to curate this event, and a big thank you to the Kamla Raheja Foundation for their generous and continued support for the memorial series, and a big thank you to the audience. Thank you very much and have a great day. See you all tomorrow, same channel, same place. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.